Well, hi everyone and welcome to Mark's 900. I'm Mark. Now, a couple of weeks ago, my mate Sid and I took a trip out to the Peak District. We thought we'd make the most of what's left of our summer, and I know it's always going to be a risk to plan anything in September in the UK, but we went for it, and I'm pleased to say that the weather was, for the most part, glorious. What I would say though is that I wore my leather jacket and just a fleece underneath and some light RST gloves, and it really wasn't quite warm enough. So day 2 saw an extra t-shirt and that did the job. But yeah, it pretty much was quite a chilly one on the way up there. So on the way up we did stop at Ironbridge, which I can highly recommend. It's full of quirky shops, restaurants and a brilliant little cafe where the owner is a Lambretta fan, and I had my first sit on a 1960s scooter. I can really see the attraction of it, but I can safely say that I won't be getting one anytime soon because somehow it's just not for me. Of course, there is also an iron bridge to look at, a work of art built in 1779 by Abraham Darby, a fact fondly remembered from school days when I wasn't cocking about at the back of the class. So here we are then, a couple of pictures of Iron Bridge, and as I say, definitely worth parking up and spending some time there. So one of the other places we went through on the way up was a place called Macclesfield. Although we didn't stop, but it does have a surprising significance for me. You see, back in the day when I was about 17, a band called the Macc Lads were massive. They were a post-punk rock sort of comedy band from Macclesfield who sang classics such as Beer and Sex and Chips and Gravy, Sit on Me Face and I'll Guess Your Weight, and of course the all-time classic Sweaty Betty. Now, they were eventually banned from playing in every town in Britain due to the riots they incited, but I have to say the whole thing was actually hilarious. Well, at least it was as a teenager. And these guys operated out of a place called Hectic House in Macclesfield, so it was wonderful to be there, having heard all about it in so many of their songs. Then it turns out my mate Sid was also a fan, and he'd actually written to them back in the day asking for something or other. Now, this was well before emails, so they actually had to take their time to write a letter back to Sid, and all they did was tell him to fuck off. So if you're interested in the Macc Lads and you're not easily offended, go and have a look on YouTube. There's still plenty of it about. Anyway, enough about my misspent youth. Let's talk about the Peak District, and I have to say I've got mixed feelings about this as a trip. Okay, undoubtedly the scenery is absolutely stunning and all of the roads are in great condition. But what really annoyed us is the amount of speed cameras and speed traps. Talk about big brothers watching you. And on one road in particular, they had fixed cameras all the way along it, and then they also had a cop at the side of the road with a speed gun. They even have average speed limits on some of the best roads, like the one I'm on at the moment going up to the Cat and Fiddle. Now, I'm not saying that I want to go speeding everywhere, and I would never encourage anyone to do that, but you might just want to get a shift on going past a tractor, or have a momentary burst of speed, not quite realising it, and what a pain if you get unlucky and happen to get caught. So, you need to spend the whole of your time there tirelessly watching the speedo and not losing concentration to the beautiful countryside. Now, I suppose, is that a legitimate complaint? Perhaps these cameras are saving lives and keeping us safe, and we should be thankful for every single one of them. Well, you've been warned, and it's always going to be an emotive subject, so let's just leave it there for the time being and instead talk about tyres. Well, it wouldn't be one of my videos if they didn't get a mention. So the bike has now been fitted with the Pirelli Angel STs, and I was a little bit nervous about that because I'd only done the job a weekend before, and I wasn't sure if I'd done it properly. I wasn't sure if they'd stay inflated, but also whether they were actually any good. So I've had a few comments to say that they're not that confidence inspiring and definitely not good in the cold. Well, all I can say is so far so good. They've been excellent in both the wet and the dry, but untested in the cold as yet, and of course I'll have to let you know about the longevity at some point early next year. In fact, what I'll probably do later on is just do an update. So anyway, back to the journey up there. Following a few detours to see some history and relive our youth, then we finally got to our hotel in a town on the edge of the Peak District called Leek. And we were booked to stay in the Premier Inn just because, well, you just know what to expect with the Premier Inn. And it was pretty standard and very purple, as they all are. So a quick freshen up and then straight out for a pint and a curry. Now, they do like their real ale in this part of the country, and Sid in particular was in his element. As for me, well, I'm a lager lout, so if we ever meet in a pub, mine's a pint of Carling, and you can pretty much buy that anywhere. So all I can say about the local ale is that it's reportedly very, very good there, and I have that from a very reliable source who tested quite a lot of it. So after all that beer and curry, we had a great night's sleep, and then in the morning we went down for breakfast. All you can eat breakfast, so you know, you feel kind of obliged to eat everything that you can. We had about 6 different courses, everything from yoghurt to bacon, and then we waddled off to our bikes for a day of riding. And The first place we were going was straight up the hill into the Peak District up to a pub which is called the Cat and Fiddle, and it's the second highest pub in England, which is not much of an accolade, but nevertheless seemed like a good place to go. And apparently the road up there is great, and that's the road I'm filming on at the moment. So as I said before, camera is checking your average speed right the way along the length of this road. So we took it nice and easy, and when we got there, well, we didn't actually go to the pub first of all. We stopped at a tea room just before it, which is called the Peak View Tea Room. And we thought we'd pull in there because that looked really nice rather than going into the pub. And I think actually the pub might be closed now because it was bought by somebody who was going to turn it into England's highest whiskey distillery. But I don't know if that ever happened. But anyway, we stopped at the tea rooms just before it, so Peak View Tea Rooms. And as we pulled in, I noticed this very nice trike, big silver looking trike. You'll see it on the video. And I said to the guy who owned it, I hope that thing's got reverse so that you can get out of the car park. And then he started rattling off about how they come with reverse these days and they didn't used to. And then he started to tell me more about his bike. It wasn't that interesting, and that he was in the aviation industry. And then he looked up to the sky and he said, the thing is, I'm getting really cross about all this. And I looked up, I said, what's the problem? And he said, well, all these trails that are coming off the aircraft. And there were loads of them in the sky. And he said, look at that one, that's at 33,000 feet, it's minus 60 up there, and that's a water vapour trail that's coming out the back. It'll evaporate quite quickly, you'll see. These others are going to be up in the sky for the rest of the morning. If you come back in a few hours' time, you'll see they're all still there, and it's absolutely outrageous. I've complained so many times, and I'm trying to raise people's awareness for this. And I said, well, okay, that's a bit weird. What are they then? And he said, well, these are chemical trails. And I said, well, why do planes want to throw chemicals out the back? Is it bad fuel or something? And he said, no, this is all about depopulation. Oh my God, he's a nutter. And I looked round at Sid. Sid's kind of laughing his head off and walking off in the other direction to leave me to it, and I end up in a conversation about chemical trails with this lunatic for the next 10 minutes before I could escape. Anyway, I now know all about chemtrails. So if you look at this next bit of video, you can see up in the sky there, it's full of them, and apparently that's putting chemicals down onto us in order to depopulate. Now, why you would want to depopulate the Peak District, I don't know. Maybe depopulate a few of the speed cameras, but not the people. There's hardly anybody here. Anyway, the tea shop was very quaint. It was full of old teapots and a massive selection of cake, and also a load of knitted stuff that you could buy. And then we came out and we headed off up the hill past this, which is the Cat and Fiddle that we've talked about, and as you can see there aren't too many people there. And then off we went into the depths of the Peak District. I've said this before, but the views up there are absolutely fantastic. I mean, it's just rolling open English countryside, as beautiful and green as you'll ever see it. So that was great to see, and it was a great ride. And then we saw off in the distance a load of people climbing up this hill, and they're all wearing like climbing gear and stuff like that. And we said, wouldn't it be great if the road kind of goes up that way and we'll get off our bikes and walk up with them? And sure enough, the road did come back on itself, and we ended up by a thing called Mam Tor, which means Mother Hill, and we parked up at the base of it, and we just followed everyone else and walked up a series of steps. It was quite a high climb all the way to the top. Now the funny thing about this was that everybody else was in climbing gear. There's people with crampons and rucksacks and all sorts of stuff going on, and me and Sid in our motorbike gear. So yeah, we got to the top with the rest of them, and then we stopped for a look around. And I've got to say, that was well worth doing. It was a bit of a break from riding the bikes, and it was great. I managed to walk off breakfast finally by the time we got to the top of there. And it is a fantastic view. I highly recommend that if you get the chance. Of course, we did have to stop for a stupid photo amongst all those other people. Well, I mean, we'd gone to all the trouble going up there with our motorbike gear on, so, you know, what else would you do? So the road down from Mam Tor was definitely one of the highlights. You can see this, incredible views and these very long sweeping bends all the way down this road, which just went on for miles. Now, we met a couple of other bikers up there, and what they told us was coming back up this road was an even better experience. But this was fine for us, and we didn't want to keep going up and down the same road because we had plenty of miles in front of us. And sure enough, we headed off towards the A57, which is a road better known as Snake Pass. Now, of course, as soon as you call a road Snake Pass, it suddenly sounds all windswept and interesting, and you definitely got to go and ride a road with a name like that. The reality of it was just kind of okay. I mean, again, the views were great, but it certainly wouldn't be worth going all that way to ride that one road. And I've got to be honest, I think there are better roads on my own doorstep in the Cotswolds, but at least I can say that I've ridden and survived the Snake Pass. Now, at the time we rode this, there was a water shortage, so we were on like hosepipe bans and stuff like that, and you wonder how real that actually is. And then we discovered this reservoir, and we realised just how low the water was on this reservoir. You can see off into the distance that there's slipways that go into the water that don't come anywhere near it because it's so low. So that was a bit of a worry, almost as much of a worry as the fact that that water may have been getting contaminated by the chemical trails. Anyway, another night of food and beer ensued, and then we headed back the next morning. Now, on balance, I think the Peak District is an excellent place to visit, and so far, definitely in the top 5 with these other places. Now, I'll definitely go back one day, but I reckon I'd like to do it on a classic British bike, or maybe a slightly more reliable retro version, like, the Royal Enfield Interceptor, or one of those new BSA Gold Stars. We actually met a guy up there who was on a classic Triumph, and he was having a blast, and it just seemed like a really cool thing to do. So the last thing to mention is that it was just by chance that I noticed a company on the internet called Roadrunner Pics, who unbeknownst to us were taking photos on the Snake Pass. Now, they hang out at various well-known biker roads around the UK, as do a couple of other companies like Biker Pics, so go and check them out. They take great quality pictures, and you might have already been snapped in one, just like we were. Well, anyway, wherever you end up, keep safe, keep your chains oiled, and I'll see you soon.